Hello world, my name is David Jose, and in this channel we talk about how to create and integrate APIs so you can improve your existing applications. So I have just created my account on the portal, and I have also subscribed to the collection product, and I'm going to show you how to do that. You just need to click on products and then choose collections. Then you should be able to enter some collection name, agree to the terms, and then click on subscribe. So once subscribed to a product, you need to go to the profile page where you're going to see your primary and secondary key. So this should be the name of your collection. And I do not mind revealing my primary key or secondary key because I'm just going to regenerate it to have a new one. And there's no difference between primary and secondary, so you can use any of them when working with the API. So I would like to introduce to you also some tools that we'll be using and resources. And the first tool is this website, which will help us with the UUIDs because we can just refresh the page and get a UUID every time. And inside here we have the Postman coming from the MTN community, and this is going to be very helpful to integrate or to interact with the API rather than using the documentation. So we have everything provided here, and we are just going to get things started. So let's head into our own Postman and create a new collection. So we're just going to close this and rename this collection to be the uh, our MTN MOMO. Why not? And we need to make our first post request, which we can name API user, which is the first request or the first thing that we need to do. We need to create an API user, and next we will also need to create an API key. Remember, these are the two major information or credentials. I don't know how to call this, but these are the first two major steps that we need to, go to in order to get things started with the sandbox, so we can get some token and then make some requests. So here we want to call this token because we need to generate some token, and I am just going to head to our resources so we know what kind of information we need to provide inside our headers, body, and which endpoint we actually need to use. So inside the resource here, we have this Momo Open API, but we have another folder down here which says Sandbox provisioning, and this is the one we're going to use. I just want to know what is found inside the headers, so it helps me save some time. I need to, specify this X reference ID, just like we saw inside the documentation. And this X reference ID needs to be a new UUID. So I'm just going to generate or copy this ready to go UUID, add it inside here. The next thing that I need to have is my content type, which is already mentioned by default or referenced by default by Postman. So I may not need to have that. This is going to be our subscription key, sorry. And what we need to do is to just add the variable name first and then head to our profile here to grab our primary key. So again, feel free to use the primary or the secondary key. So done with the headers, we need the endpoint before making the request. And for that, we can head into this to get the endpoint. Once we have the endpoint, we just need the body. Maybe we need to send somebody. Shall we? Let's check it out. Yes, we do. This is where we register our callback in case we want to work with callbacks when creating the API user. you need to create or to register your callback. And you may find some more information about this down the page here. When clicking on overview, you can just scroll down to kind of have some more instructions going on here, or head to the documentation in order to, have more details on this. But since we don't want to use uh, a callback, so what's the solution then? This is exactly what we're going to see inside or on Postman here. So I'm just gonna paste this first, and instead of providing any callback, I'm just going to say string. So by referencing the value string here, this will tell the server that we do not want to provide any callback. We just want to proceed without any callback. And I am going to execute this request, or to run this request. And I have this response status code 201, which says created. And what does it mean exactly, created without any body response? What it means is that this UID that we have provided is going to be our API user. So by sending a post request to this endpoint, we are simply telling the server that, okay, we have just registered this UID as our API user. So this is very important. This is going to be an ID that we're going to use in the next request. So for the API key, we can again return for to the resources for instructions. So in here, we don't have any instructions. We can head to the Momo folder, and then let's check this get API user. I'm gonna click on overview just to have some information. So unfortunately, I don't have any information about that. Since I do not have any information, I can still trust the documentation, and I'm just gonna click on documentation, then API key, API user, scroll down, create API key. So I have this base URL, then slash API user slash some UUID, and this should be my API user UUID. Then I should add some API key afterwards. So I am going to copy the entire endpoint, add it inside here. And for the base URL, I can still trust this base URL in here. So just gonna add it here, and we need to change this UUID, which is not ours. We need to make sure we are reusing the same UUID here. So just gonna copy this and add it here. Then back to the documentation, we need to provide only one header variable, which is going to be our subscription key. So again, I will just copy this and head back here. We can get this from the previous request. So again, just paste it here. We don't need anything inside the body. So I'm just gonna get rid of this default JSON, and then inside the headers, we do want something inside the headers. I think something went wrong. Okay, we have our API key. Okay. I think I inserted the headers value inside the params, which is a mistake. So we want that to be inside the headers. Something you may need to pay attention to. So we want this to be only inside the headers, nothing inside the params. So I'm just gonna make it clean. Okay. So this is again a post request, and when sending this, we should have exactly our API key. So now that we have our API user and our API key, the next thing that we need to do is to generate our token. So how do we generate our token? We need to use a different endpoint, and we may also need to send some headers information. So again, we'll trust the documentation. That's the best thing to do. So we have this folder authorization, then generate access token. And what I need to specify inside the headers is only our subscription key. Let's keep it in mind. What I need to verify to mention inside my authorization here is basic auth. So this is simply telling the server that okay, we the sandbox, okay, that we want to actually authenticate ourselves uh, into the environment, and for that we need to send our API user and API key, just like the way you log into a platform by providing your username and password. So our username is going to be our API user, then password API key. By sending this request, we should get a token, and that token is going to be a bearer token. So we're going to change this basic auth to bearer token when we make requests to other endpoints. So we need the subscription key inside the headers, and we need to send our keys to have a basic auth in order to generate a token. So what about the endpoint? How do we get the right endpoint? So we can go to overview and then scroll down the page. We have some URL provided to us down here. So I'm just going to copy the entire URL, head back to my Postman, and just paste it here. And for the key, we said we need this same value inside the headers. And then since we're using the same primary key, no need to change anything. We just reuse the same information. We don't need anybody as well, so I'm just going to get rid of that and save just in case I've not yet saved, because I want to keep that. Okay, so back to our token file. We just want to have this inside the headers, have our endpoint to be a slash collection without any version, just slash collection, then slash token, very important. And inside the authorization, we want to have a basic auth where um, we can send some username and password. And in this case, we need to grab our API user, which is nothing but the UUID that we use from the beginning. Then we have the API key that we've just generated that we need to use inside here as our password. So then I'm going to send this request, and there we go. We have a 200. Everything went well, and this generated an access token for us. And this access token is going to be used you know, when we want to make some requests, because this is a token identifying, or this is a token which tells, or which can tell who we are to the server. Remember, we use tokens for security when making requests to the server. And here we have some expiring date, expiring time. So this token is going to expire in an hour. So after 1 hour, we will not be able to make any request. But the good thing is that we can always, send this request as many times as we want in order to refresh this token. So I can send the same request again, and then I have a different generated token. So I'm just gonna copy this token and then try to make a different request. Let me just kind of create. I'm gonna use this and say request to pay, for example, request to pay, and this is something we're going to test out. I'm just going to add my bearer token here. So this is what we call a bearer token. So we just need to copy all the characters inside this field. I'm going to put this down. And when we select bearer token, this is going to be sent every time we send a request to an endpoint. So when we make our request to pay request, we need to send the bearer token and then have the endpoint which you know um, which specifies the request to pay. Let's return to the resource that we have. And when we want to make a payment, let me say get paid, request to pay. Okay, here we can see that we still need to specify our X, reference ID. But this time, this is what I was explaining in the presentation. This time, this X reference ID is not going to be our user ID, but instead it's going to be the request ID. So this is going to be the ID of the request. And notice that inside the authorization, they are using the bearer token because this is a private, it's a very secure request. We cannot, afford to make a request like this without any security, without any safety. So that's why we send this request using a bearer token. And this is very sensitive, especially in production. You should not allow any request to be successful without a bearer token because you need to know who is the user making the request, for example. So inside the headers here, we're going to make sure to have all these variables except the callback that we're not using. So let's go. First, we want this X reference ID. I'm just gonna paste it here since we're done with the bearer token. So there we go. So again, this, as I said, it's not going to be the same API user, but when making this request, this is going to be just a random UID. Excuse me. So this should be just a random UID, which is gonna work. So I'm just gonna refresh to generate a new one. So back to Postman, we have a new UUID, which is going to be the ID of the request we are just about to send. Back to the resource, we can grab the X target environment. So this is a new variable that we're using here. And this is just going to be Sandbox. How do I know? It's mentioned right inside here. So back to Postman, we want that to be Sandbox in lowercase. And what's next? We want the subscription key, which is obvious. Yeah, we do want that. And that can be found in here. So I'm just gonna copy this and paste it in here. And the next thing that we may want to do is to check if we have any body information to provide, and that's exactly what I'm going to check in here. And I can see that we do have some body information to provide, and this is very important. Remember, this request is a request to pay that the user is going to receive in order to confirm this payment. And when we send this request, we may need to mention some or specify some amount that the user needs to pay uh, by confirming this request. We need to send a currency, we need to send some the user mobile number and stuff like that. So that's the reason why we need to send somebody inside this request. And the API or MTN MOMO is taking care of reaching out to the user with all the information that we are specifying inside our request. So that's again the power of using an API instead of having to do this on your own. And we need to head into our row so we can just paste the same JSON, and we may need to specify the user's phone number here. So for now, I'm just gonna type 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9. Then you may also change information, pay a message, like what type of message you want the user to see when receiving the request and stuff like that. But for now, we're just going to leave it like that, and we want to confirm the endpoint as well. Back to the overview tab, we have this collection version 1 request to pay. Okay, just want to confirm that down the page. Okay, I will grab the entire endpoint here and just paste it right inside, then send the request. And the request was successful because we have this to or to accepted. So this means that our user has received a notification requesting him to kind of validate the payment, if I'm not mistaken. And then we should be able to, in case we had a callback, this is the moment when we kind of get, a payload from the server in response of the decision of the user. But in this case, we are just going to make a GET request in order to get the payment status. And to do that, we can create a new file, then GET, and we can head back to the documentation and see how to get the status request to pay. So it's actually the status request to pay, rather, so that we kind of know what was the decision of the user. Did he confirm the transaction or the request, or he declined? So we want to get that status, and in that case, this is the endpoint we use. We still need to send the bearer token and the same headers, except mm, some variables. And we do have a param here, or we have to send some request ID, which is the UUID of our request, so that this endpoint will know that it has to return the status of the request having the given or the provided UUID. So let's retrieve the endpoint. I'm just going to scroll down the page as usual and copy the entire endpoint. So I'm just going to have it up to slash so I can add my reference ID. And to save some time, I'm just gonna duplicate this so I can rename it, let's say, get request to pay status. Okay, and here I'm just gonna paste the endpoint. Then for the UUID, I'm going to head into headers, and this is the UUID of our transaction. So if I paste it here, this should tell the, or they should return the status of this request. And we need the authorization, which is already in there. We need the headers to have some variables. Okay, we did not have the same variable because I did not save, I guess. So let's duplicate that again, and we can delete the previous one, or let's just keep it so we can have the endpoint with all the required information. Just make sure to save that so we can have our headers here. So we do not need to send any X reference ID. So this is not required here because we already sending it inside the URL. We need the X target environment, I guess. We can confirm that. In here, yes, we do need that, and we need the subscription key as well. So next, we want not any information inside the body. That's no longer required. I'm just gonna get rid of this to avoid any confusion. There we go. Next, we want some. Oops, I guess I deleted the right file. Can we undo that? I don't think so. I got too excited. So I think we're going to duplicate this again. So first of all, we can copy the endpoint. So we save some time. Delete this. And then I am going to duplicate this last endpoint. I mean, this last file and then paste the endpoint so I can have the header. So we kind of repeat the same process. We do not need the X reference ID. We said because we already referencing that inside the URL. What we need is not the body as well. We have the authorization in place. We don't need any params. And sending this should return the status of the payment. So we have this for resource not found. Okay, let's try with the colon because I saw some colon. No, still not found. Um, oh, this should be a get request rather than a post request. So if I save this and send, normally this should work. And there we go. So we have our get request. It should be a get request because we are requesting the server to give us the status of this request. So what we get here is our payload of the details that we sent to the server and the status of the request, which is successful in this case. So in case again you had a callback setup, so this is the kind of payload you should have received from the server um, to your URL provided as the callback. So this is then an alternative when sending or when trying to find the status of your request to pay request. So that being said, that's pretty much what we need to do, how we need to work with the API. And in the next video, we shall see how to integrate all this inside a backend. And as for now, that being said, that's all for me, and I'll see you in the next one.